Welcome to Talk Treatises.
It's great to be back.
So, for anyone who might be new to the show, here's the elevator pitch. We are the place where we take those intimidating classics off the shelf.
The ones that have been staring you down for years.
Exactly, and we really crack them open. We're not just reading the back cover. We're trying to take the engine apart and see how it really works.
That's the mission. And today, we are tackling an absolute monster. A beautiful, complex, and I think an incredibly influential monster of a book.
It really is. We are doing a deep dive into William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience, a study in human nature. This is one of those titles that, I feel like everyone has heard. It gets quoted all the time.
All the time.
But I'm not sure how many people have actually sat down and waded through the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's massive. And it covers so much ground. I mean, psychology, theology, philosophy. It's a lot.
It is a lot. And to really get it, you have to understand where it came from. I mean, these weren't just essays he wrote in his study somewhere. They were lectures, specifically the Gifford Lectures on Natural Religion, delivered at the University of Edinburgh. This was way back in 1901 and 1902.
And the setting is so important here, isn't it? Because Edinburgh, at the turn of the century, it wasn't exactly a hotbed of radical new thinking.
No, not at all. You have to picture the scene. You've got the University of Edinburgh, which is this bastion of Scottish academia, of Presbyterianism. It's formal, it's stiff, it is very, very theological.
Right.
And then onto the stage walks William James. He's an American. He's a psychologist. He's the brother of the famous novelist Henry James. And he is, arguably the most famous intellectual in America at that moment.
But he's not a preacher. He's not there to give them a sermon.
No, and he makes that crystal clear right out of the gate. He basically looks at this entire room full of theologians and scholars and says, look, I'm not one of you. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a scholar of religious history. He says he is there as a psychologist. He's there to look at the human mind and how it experiences this thing we call religion. He's putting the human soul under a microscope.
That is such a bold move, to stand in front of a bunch of religious experts and essentially say, I'm going to explain your field better than you can, but I'm going to use science to do it.
It was incredibly bold, but James had this unique ability to be really respectful while at the same time completely dismantling the traditional way of looking at things.
How does he do that? Where does he start?
Well, first he draws a really, really strict circle around his topic. When we say religion today, or even back then, most people think of institutions, right?
Sure. Churches, rituals, priests, dogmas.
The Vatican, the local parish council, all of it. The bureaucracy of belief.
Yeah, the bureaucracy of belief. I like that.
James just pushes all of that aside. He says, I'm not interested in any of that. He explicitly limits his scope to what he calls personal religion.
And he has a very specific definition for this that I think we need to get on the table right away, because it frames literally everything else we're going to talk about.
He does. He defines it as the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, so far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine.
In their solitude. That's the phrase that just jumps out at me.
It's the whole thing.
He's not interested in what you chant when you're in a crowd of 1,000 people. He wants to know what happens when you are alone in your room at 3 a.m, or you're walking alone in the woods and you feel something, something larger than yourself.
He calls it the acute fever of religion. He says that for most people, religion is just this kind of dull habit. It's secondhand.
Secondhand, what does he mean?
You inherit your religion the same way you inherit your last name or your hair color. It's part of your social furniture. It's not alive. James wants to study the religious geniuses, the people for whom religion wasn't a habit. It was a direct, often terrifying, all-consuming reality. He wants the original source material, not the copy.
And to get to that source material, he uses what he calls the empirical method, which, again, sounds very scientific for a book about God.
It is. He totally abandons the search for abstract, absolute definitions. He's not trying to prove God exists with some kind of logical syllogism. He thinks that's, mostly a waste of time.
So what's he doing instead?
He's trying to see what religion does to a person. He looks at concrete examples, often really extreme ones, to try and understand the pattern. It's data-driven in a way.
But the data isn't numbers. The data is people's internal lives.
Exactly. And this leads us to the first big intellectual problem he has to solve. And I think this is one of the most relevant parts of the book for us today, actually. He talks about medical materialism.
This felt so modern when I was reading it. It sounds exactly like the standard internet atheist argument you hear all the time.
It really is. You have to remember the time period. This is the turn of the 20th century. Science is on the rise. Neurology is the new hot topic. We're starting to understand the brain as a machine. And there was this tendency among the medical materialists, as James calls them, to dismiss religious experiences, especially the really intense ones, as just symptoms of some kind of pathology.
So they would look at a saint having a vision and say, that's not God, that's just a mental illness.
Precisely. They'd say, oh, St. Paul wasn't seeing Jesus on the road to Damascus. He was having a discharging lesion of the occipital cortex.
Right.
Or St. Teresa wasn't conversing with angels. She was a hysteric. Or my favorite, George Fox was just a degenerate with a disordered colon. They reduce the entire spiritual experience to its biological cause.
The you are nothing but a pack of neurons argument.
That's it. And James just calls this out beautifully. He says this is a fundamental logical error. It's the confusion between an existential judgment and a spiritual judgment.
Okay, let's unpack that. What's the difference there?
An existential judgment asks, where did this come from? What's its origin? Is it a firing neuron? A chemical imbalance, a virus? That's a question of roots.
Okay.
A spiritual judgment, on the other hand, or what he calls the proposition of value, asks a totally different question. It asks, is this thing good? Does it work? Does it produce value in the world? Is it true in a meaningful way?
He uses that great phrase, fruits, not roots. I think that has to be the bumper sticker for this entire deep dive.
It's the central theme of the whole book. James argues that just because you can trace the biological origin of a state of mind, maybe you're tired, maybe you have a fever, maybe you're neurotic, that doesn't tell you anything at all about the value of the insight you get during that state.
He makes a great point about scientific theories here, too. He says, look, if we're going to play this game, we have to play it fairly.
Yes. He points out that scientific theories are also products of a physical brain. If a scientist has a breakthrough, that's also just a result of neurons firing in a particular way. So if we're going to say a religious insight is invalid because the guy who had it had a liver condition, do we also have to throw out the theory of relativity if we find out Einstein had a headache when he thought of it, or if he was feeling moody?
That is such a sharp rebuttal. We don't judge the physics by the physicist's health. We judge the physics by whether it actually predicts the motion of the stars.
Exactly. We judge it by its results. And James says we must treat religion the same way. We shouldn't judge it by its origins in the nervous system. We should judge it by its results in a person's conduct. Does it make them a better person? Does it add value to the world?
And to illustrate this, he uses George Fox, the founder of the Quakers. I really want to get into the details of this story because James paints such a vivid and honestly kind of wild picture.
It is wild, and James doesn't shy away from the weirdness of it at all. He fully admits that Fox was, by any modern standard, deeply disturbed. He quotes directly from Fox's own journal, where he describes this one incident in the town of Litchfield.
Okay, set the scene for us.
All right, so it's winter. George Fox is walking along a road. He sees the 3 spires of the church in Litchfield, and he says they strike at his life. He has this visceral, almost violent, negative reaction to the architecture, and he feels this command from the Lord. So he takes off his shoes.
In the snow.
In the snow.
Yeah.
He leaves his shoes with some shepherds nearby, and he walks barefoot into the town of Litchfield. And then he just starts screaming.
What is he shouting?
He's walking up and down the street shouting, "Woe to the bloody city of Litchfield." He's looking around and he says he sees a channel of blood running down the streets. It's a full-blown hallucinatory episode.
Wow.
He is, for all intents and purposes, a madman.
If you saw that on the street today, you'd cross the street. You would call for help.
Absolutely. You would say, this man needs medication. He needs to be hospitalized.
Uh-huh.
But, and this is James's brilliant pivot, what was the result of George Fox's life? What was the fruit?
Well, the fruit was the Society of Friends.
The Quakers. Exactly. He founded a religious tradition that is rooted in spiritual inwardness, immense veracity, equality, and most famously, peace. He was a man of incredible spiritual power and contribution. He improved the lives of thousands of people. He stood against war. He stood against slavery.
So if we judge by the roots, the barefoot man screaming about blood in the snow, he's a lunatic.
A complete lunatic.
But if we judge by the fruits, the entire Quaker tradition, He's a spiritual genius.
Precisely, and that's his whole point.
Yeah.
We must judge religious experience by its results in conduct, not by its origins in the nervous system. And that insight really sets the table for the rest of his entire analysis. He's telling his audience, don't look away just because this stuff looks weird. Look at what it produces.
Okay, so with that framework established, fruits not roots, let's get into the main analysis. Part 1 is what he calls the reality of the unseen. And this is fascinating because he's dealing with how people perceive a presence when there's nothing there.
This is the bedrock of the religious experience for James. It's the absolute conviction that there is something there, even if your 5 senses can't detect it. He argues that for the believer, this unseen world is often more real, more solid, than the visible world of tables and chairs.
He uses a really cool analogy to explain this, the magnet and the iron bar.
It's a perfect metaphor. It's so good. He asks us to imagine a bar of iron. It has no eyes, no ears, no sense of touch. It is just a dumb, inert piece of metal. But if you bring a magnet near it, that iron bar is intensely, powerfully aware of a force.
It feels a pull.
It feels a pull. It enters a state of tension. The iron bar can't describe the magnet. It can't see the magnet. It has no concept of magnetism.
But the influence of that magnet determines the iron bar's entire reality in that moment.
That's it. And James says the believer is like that iron bar. They feel the magnetic pull of the divine. Even without any direct sensory evidence, they orient their entire life towards it.
And he's careful to distinguish this from simple imagination. Right. This isn't just someone sitting around thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice if there were a God?
No, it's much more visceral. He talks about it as a quasi-sensible reality. He gives all these examples of people who feel a presence in the room. Sometimes it's a religious presence. Sometimes it's just a hallucination of another person being there. But the key is the conviction, the feeling of reality.
And he says this belief has a real world effect. He talks about how it changes the strenuousness of life.
The strenuous life. Yeah, he uses that phrase a lot. It feels very Teddy Roosevelt, doesn't it?
It does. What does he mean by that in this context?
He means that if you believe the visible world is all there is, you might still live a good moral life, but it's a heavy stoic kind of morality. You do your duty, you grin and bear it. It's like walking a tightrope without a net. You're doing it just because you have to.
It's duty without any joy.
That's a good way to put it. But if you believe in an unseen order, if you believe there's a divine companion, a higher power, a net call, it unlocks a whole new kind of energy. It shifts your emotional center. You can suddenly endure things, you can sacrifice things, you can perform acts of heroism that would be psychologically impossible otherwise. The unseen world provides this background that changes the entire color of the foreground.
It's like the difference between running a marathon alone in the pouring rain versus running it in a packed stadium where you know everyone is cheering you on. Even if you can't see the crowd, just knowing they're there changes your performance.
That's a decent analogy. It shifts the emotional center. And that shift leads us directly into his famous classification of human temperaments. This is one of the most well-known parts of the book, the distinction between healthy-mindedness and the sick soul.
I have to say, reading this section, I found myself trying to diagnose myself and basically everyone I know. It's such a compelling framework.
It really is.
So let's start with the healthy-minded. Who are these people?
The healthy-minded are those people who are, he says, constitutionally incapable of prolonged suffering. Their souls have a sky blue tint. They just see the universe as fundamentally good. When they look at evil or pain, they either just ignore it or they reinterpret it as a temporary bump in the road, as good in the making.
So these are the born optimists.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's deeper than just, looking on the bright side.
Oh, it's much deeper. It's almost a biological inability to feel the weight of the world's tragedy. James points to Walt Whitman as the supreme example of this temperament. Whitman looks at everything, the sun, the grass, the crowds, even a corpse, and he just says, it is good. He accepts everything with this robust, almost animal enthusiasm. He doesn't have to try to be happy, he just is.
And James also connects this to the mind cure movement of his time, which I guess that's the great-grandparent of today's new thought or manifestation culture, right?
Yep, absolutely. The lineage is direct. The mind cure movement, which was huge in the late 19th century, was based on this idea that fear and worry are the roots of all illness and all evil. If you can just think positive thoughts, if you can align yourself with the infinite good, then disease and poverty will literally vanish.
The idea that your mind creates your reality.
Exactly.
And what's James's take on this? Because as a medical doctor and a scientist, you'd think he would just roll his eyes at the idea that thinking happy thoughts can cure a broken leg.
And he's fascinatingly ambivalent about it. As a scientist, he sees the logical flaws. He knows that simply ignoring evil doesn't make it go away in the, mechanical sense.
Right.
But as a pragmatist, remember, fruits not roots. He has to admit, hey, for some people this actually works. It cures their anxiety, it makes them functional, it makes them happy. So he has to respect it as a valid religious strategy.
But then
Yeah.
Then we have the sick soul. And this is where the whole tone of the book really shifts into a minor key.
Yes. If the healthy-minded person looks at the world and sees a beautiful garden, the sick soul looks at the exact same world and sees a slaughterhouse.
Wow.
The sick soul has a much lower pain threshold. They are acutely, painfully aware that all natural goods, youth, health, success, love, are temporary. They're haunted by what he calls the vanity of mortal things.
The skull at the banquet.
That's the perfect image for it. No matter how good the party is, the sick soul can't stop looking at the skull in the corner. And James argues that for the sick soul, healthy-mindedness feels incredibly shallow. It feels like a lie. You can't just tell someone who is gripped by existential dread to cheer up. It's insulting to them. They feel like they are seeing the deep truth of the world, which is that everything you love will decay and die.
To illustrate this, James gives the example of Leo Tolstoy. This is such a powerful case study because Tolstoy wasn't, some loser living in his mom's basement.
No, and that's exactly why James chooses him. Tolstoy had everything a human being could want. He was the most famous author in the world. He was rich. He was a genius. He had a family. He had land. And yet, in his middle age, he fell into a state of absolute anhedonia, a total loss of zest for life.
He described it as a stopping of life, didn't he?
He did. He said that life felt like a stupid and evil joke that someone had played on him. He would go to bed every night, literally hoping he wouldn't wake up in the morning.
And what was the core of it?
The core of his despair was the brute fact of death. He felt that since he and everything he loved would eventually be dust, nothing he did now could possibly matter. It was a total crisis of meaning. If the universe ends in nothingness, then everything is already nothing.
And James connects this state to what he calls the divided self. The struggle of the sick soul is often characterized by having these two warring wills inside.
Right. The healthy-minded are once born. They're sort of unified from the start. They're happy. They're whole. But the sick soul is twice born. They have to go through a process. They have two warring factions inside them, the lower self and the higher self, or the flesh and the spirit. James uses St. Augustine as the classic example here. Augustine wants to be good, he wants to be spiritual, but he also really, really likes his worldly pleasures.
He famously prayed, "Lord, make me chaste, but not yet."
Exactly. That is the cry of the divided self. I want to be good, but I also want to have fun. And James argues that for these people, for the sick soul, simple optimism isn't enough. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. They're too broken.
So what do they need?
To find peace, the sick soul needs a second birth. They need to be fundamentally remade from the ground up.
And that process of being remade brings us directly to the next major section of the book, conversion.
Conversion. Now, James treats this not just as a religious event, but as a psychological mechanism. He defines conversion as the process by which a divided, unhappy self becomes unified and happy.
How does that happen?
It's the moment where religious ideas, which used to be on the periphery of your consciousness, things you knew about but didn't really feel, suddenly move to the habitual center of your personal energy.
And he says there are two types of conversion, volitional and self-surrender. What's the difference?
Volitional conversion is gradual. It's the slow, effortful building of new habits. You decide to be a better person and you chip away at it day by day. It's like building a house brick by brick. It's methodical.
Okay.
But James is much more interested in the second type, self-surrender.
This is the dramatic one, the lightning bolt from the sky.
This is the critical moment where the individual finally stops struggling and just lets go. The person has tried everything to fix themselves. They've tried to conquer their sin or their melancholy with their own willpower, and they have failed over and over again. They're exhausted. They've hit a wall.
And they just give up.
They give up completely. They say, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. And paradoxically, James notes, it is often only at that moment when they stop trying to save themselves that they are saved.
And to the person experiencing it, it feels miraculous.
Totally. It feels like an external force has just swooped in and taken over the controls of their life.
But James, being the psychologist that he is, has a theory for what's actually happening under the hood. This is where his big innovation comes in, right?
The subconscious, yeah. We take this concept for granted today. Freud and Jung made it a household term. But at the time, this was really cutting-edge psychology. James posits that the subconscious self, or the subliminal consciousness, is the place where our motives incubate.
So while your conscious mind is struggling and failing and beating its head against the wall, your subconscious is actually processing all these desires for change.
That's the idea. It's like a pot of water simmering with the lid on. You don't see the water boiling until the lid suddenly blows off. In what he calls instantaneous conversion, the subconscious work has been going on for a long, long time. So the ripe fruit is ready. And then pop, it just bursts into the conscious mind. To the person, it feels like a bolt of lightning from God. To the psychologist, it's the result of a long, hidden incubation period.
But does James say that makes it not divine? Does explaining the mechanism explain it away?
No, and this is so crucial to understanding James. He says the mechanism is psychological. It involves the subconscious. But that doesn't rule out the possibility that the subconscious is the doorway through which the divine actually enters our lives.
Ah, okay.
He leaves that door wide open.
Yeah.
He says, just because we know how the door opens, that doesn't mean we know who or what walked through it.
So someone goes through this conversion, the lid blows off. What happens next? What are the fruits of this experience?
James lists some really beautiful common characteristics. First, there's a sense of perceived newness. The world literally looks different. People often report that the sky looks bluer, the trees look greener, the world feels clean or washed. Then there's an ecstasy of happiness, a profound sense of peace. And most importantly, there is a shifting of the emotional centers. The things that used to tempt you, alcohol, anger, lust, suddenly lose all their power. They leave you cold. And the things you used to hate or find boring duty, sacrifice, charity, suddenly feel burning hot and absolutely essential.
This sounds like it leads us to the next section, which is basically a profile of the person who has been successfully converted and unified.
The saint.
To the saint, yeah. James tries to create what he calls a composite photograph of saintliness by drawing from all the world's religions, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, even Stoicism. And he finds these universal features that pop up again and again.
Okay, what are they?
First, a feeling of being in a wider life, a sense of an ideal power. Second, a sense of continuity with that power, that total surrender we were just talking about. Third, an immense elation and freedom. The fears and anxieties of the small individual self just vanish.
And the fourth.
And fourth, a shifting of the emotional center toward love and what he calls harmonious affections. So those are the internal states. But these lead to practical consequences in the world, right? He lists 4 main fruits of saintliness. Let's run through them.
Sure. First is asceticism. This is the ability or even the desire to endure pain, poverty, or hardship.
Now, to the modern ear, asceticism often sounds kind of masochistic. Why would you want to sleep on a rock or wear a hair shirt? It sounds like self-harm.
And James gets that, but he actually defends it. He calls it a war against the softness of the natural world. He thinks there's something heroic in the capacity to say no to the body's demands for comfort. He famously suggests that voluntary poverty might be the moral equivalent of war that modern society needs to keep from getting soft and decadent. He argues that our worship of material luxury is a kind of spiritual weakness, and the ascetic proves their strength by renouncing it.
That is a very hot take for our 21st century consumer society. Sell everything you own to prove you're strong.
It is, but he thinks we need that kind of rigor. The second fruit is strength of soul. The saint is fundamentally fearless. Because they've surrendered their little ego to a higher power, they don't fear death, they don't fear poverty, they don't fear social ostracism. They're spiritually bulletproof.
Then there's purity.
Purity, which is a separation from the sensual. And finally, charity, and this is the big one. The saint has a radical tenderness toward all creatures, not just their friends, but their enemies.
Wait.
James talks about saints embracing lepers or St. Francis preaching to the birds and befriending a wolf. It's a love that transcends all normal human boundaries. It's irrational love.
So here's the tricky part, though. James applies his empirical method here, too. He asks the tough question. Is saintliness essentially good? Is it always a good thing?
And his answer is incredibly nuanced. He says it is the highest human adaptation, provided the environment allows for it.
What does that mean?
It means in a world of wolves, the non-resistant saint gets eaten. If everyone were a saint, society would be a utopia. But since saints are rare, they are often victims of the world's cruelty.
He calls them the vanguard, doesn't he?
Yes. They are the torchbearers. They might be failures in a worldly sense. They might get crushed by the machinery of society, but they show the rest of us what is possible. They represent the ideal towards which humanity might be moving. So empirically, they are valuable because they expand our moral imagination.
Okay, so we've looked at the saint. Now let's go even deeper to the very root of the whole thing. Part 5, mysticism.
This is the engine room. Jarvis asserts that all personal religious experience has its root and its center in mystical states of consciousness. Everything else flows from this.
And he gives 4 marks to identify a mystical experience. I think these are really helpful because people use the word mysticals so loosely these days to mean, anything vague or spiritual.
They do. James is very, very specific. The first mark is ineffability. The experience simply cannot be described in words. You have to experience it to know what it is. It's like trying to explain the taste of a pineapple to someone who has never eaten one. You can't do it.
Right. What's mark number 2?
Noetic quality. This is absolutely crucial. The mystical state doesn't just feel like a powerful emotion, it feels like knowledge. The mystic feels they have seen a truth, a deep objective truth, that is hidden from ordinary consciousness. It carries a sense of authority. They don't just feel that all things are one, they know it.
Okay, mark number 3.
Transiency. These states rarely last long, 30 minutes, maybe an hour or 2 at most, then they fade, leaving a powerful memory, but the intensity of the experience is gone.
The 4th mark.
Passivity. Even if you tried to induce the state, maybe through meditation or prayer or fasting, once it arrives, you feel like you've been grasped by a superior power. You are not driving the bus anymore. You are being held or carried along.
Okay, so here is the million-dollar question that James asks. If a mystic has this noetic experience, this feeling of absolute truth, does that mean that we have to believe them? If a mystic comes back and tells me he saw that the universe is actually made of cheese, do I have to accept that as fact?
And James's answer is absolutely not. This is his argument on authority. For the mystic himself, the experience is absolutely authoritative. It breaks down all their arguments. It's invulnerable to logic. You can't argue a man out of a vision he's actually seen.
But for the rest of us.
But for the outsider, for you and me, it carries no binding authority. We are under no logical obligation to believe their revelation just because they had it.
But I feel a but coming.
But there is a but. James notes that there is a striking consensus among mystics across history and across cultures. Whether they're Hindu, Christian, Sufi, or Buddhist, they tend to report the same fundamental things. The oneness of all things, the overcoming of barriers, the connection with a higher reality of love. And James says this consensus creates a presumption that there is something really there. It's not proof, but it's a strong signal that we shouldn't just dismiss the whole thing as nonsense.
Which brings us to his final section. Philosophy and conclusions. He's taken us on this incredible tour of the human mind, from the sick soul to the ecstatic saint to the ineffable mystic. Now he tries to pull it all together and asks, so what?
And he starts by taking a sledgehammer to philosophy, specifically what he calls dogmatic theology.
He's not a fan, I take it.
He thinks it's mostly a waste of time. He argues that all the classical logical proofs for God's existence, the cosmological argument, the argument from design, they don't actually convince anyone of anything. Logic, he says, is secondary. It's a tool that comes in after the fact to translate the dumb feelings of the heart into a language the intellect can handle.
And he says these abstract philosophical arguments have no cash value.
That's the classic pragmatist in him coming out. The core of pragmatism is asking, what is the practical difference if a belief is true? Knowing that God is omniscient or has aseity, what does that change about how I live my life on a Tuesday?
For most people, nothing.
James says, nothing. They're just words. But the religious experience, the feeling of a presence, the conversion of a sick soul, that changes everything. It changes a person's conduct from top to bottom. Therefore, he concludes, religion works. It gets work done in the world.
So after all that, he strips religion down to its lowest common denominator. What is left after he gets rid of all the theology and the rituals and the institutions?
He leaves us with 2 core propositions. First, that the conscious person is continuous with a wider self from which saving experiences come. And second, that a positive relation with this wider self is our true end.
And this wider self is what he's been calling the subconscious.
Psychologically, yes. James calls that the hither side of the divine. It's the part of the connection we can see and study. But then he offers his own overbelief.
His own personal hypothesis.
Right. This is where he steps out of the role of the objective psychologist and speaks for himself. He speculates that through that door of the subconscious, what he calls the farther side, We actually make contact with a higher spiritual reality. We make contact with more.
More, that's the word he uses.
That's the word he uses. More, something operative in the universe that is outside of our normal consciousness. And here's where it gets really, really interesting. James leans toward the idea of a finite God.
A finite God.
Yeah.
So, not all-powerful.
Maybe not. James suggests a pluralistic universe. He thinks maybe God isn't some infinite, all-powerful being who has everything figured out. Maybe God works with us. Maybe the universe isn't a finished product, but a work in progress.
Wow.
And our cooperation, our strenuous life, our heroism, our saintliness actually matters to the final outcome of the universe.
That is a staggering thought. It puts a tremendous amount of responsibility back on us.
It does. It validates that strenuous mood he talked about at the very beginning. It means our spiritual lives aren't just about our own personal comfort. They're about contributing to the cosmic outcome. We're not just spectators. We're on the team.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a huge amount of ground here, from the barefoot Quaker in the snow to a finite God. Now, as is our tradition here on Talk Treatises, we're going to push these incredible ideas to their breaking point with a couple of thought experiments.
My favorite part. Let's do it.
And a quick disclaimer. The following scenarios are purely for entertainment and educational purposes. They're designed to test the logical limits of James's theories.
All right.
Experiment number 1. I'm calling this the saintliness serum.
Ooh, I like the sound of that.
The premise is based on James's admission that religious geniuses are often neurotic and that medical materialism tries to explain away their visions as just pathology.
Right. The fruits not roots problem.
So here's the scenario. Imagine a future where we identify the specific neurosis, or the brain lesion, that allowed George Fox or St. Paul to have their powerful visions. We develop a serum, a medication, that perfectly cures this instability. We can render the entire population perfectly healthy-minded.
So a world with no sick souls.
Exactly. Everyone is optimistic, incapable of seeing deep evil, perfectly socially well-adjusted. So here's the philosophical crisis. If we eliminate the sick soul pathology, do we also eliminate the capacity for the second birth and the deeper insides of religion? Does a world of purely healthy-minded people lose the ability to perceive the tragic mystery of the universe?
That is a profound question. If the door to the subconscious, as James describes it, is sealed shut by our definition of mental health, does humanity lose its connection to the more? James seems to imply that the pathology is often the condition for the superior insight.
So by curing a sickness, we might actually be blinding ourselves to a deeper reality.
We would be comfortable, happy, and adjusted, but spiritually blind. We would have traded depth for stability. I think James would find that a terrifying prospect.
Okay, that's a heavy one. Let's move on to experiment number 2, the pragmatic deity generator.
This sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
The premise is based on James's pragmatism. The idea that the value of a belief is its cash value in our conduct and the richness of the life it produces, regardless of its objective origin.
Okay, got it. If it works, it's true in a sense.
Exactly. So the scenario. An advanced AI is created to generate a theology that is perfectly tailored to an individual's psychological needs. It analyzes their pain threshold, their divided self, their subconscious needs. It then constructs a complete mythology or creed, an overbelief that is objectively false, it's fiction, but it is pragmatically perfect for that user. It maximizes their energy, their charity, their peace of mind.
Okay, I'm with you.
But here's the catch. The user knows it was generated by an AI. They know it's fiction.
Here's the twist.
So here's the crisis. James argues that the faith state requires a belief that the object of faith is real. Can the fruits of religion, saintliness, heroism, peace exist if the roots are known to be artificial? Or would the user, adhering to James's will to believe, voluntarily choose to suspend their disbelief because the results are so undeniably good?
This really pushes James's pragmatism to the absolute limit. It's testing his assertion that God is real because he produces real effects. Well, if an AI fiction produces the exact same real effects, does that make it God in a pragmatic sense?
Or does the knowledge of its artificial origin destroy the whole thing?
I think James would say the conviction is the key, and you can't fake conviction. You can't trick the subconscious into opening that door if the conscious mind is standing there winking at it, knowing it's all a game. The power comes from the belief in the reality of the unseen.
That is a lot to chew on. These ideas just keep unfolding.
They really do. At the end of it all, James leaves us with this vision of a pluralistic universe where truth isn't just one single thing. It's more like a collection of keys, and different keys are needed to fit different locks.
And maybe that's the most comforting takeaway from this whole deep dive. Whether you identify as a healthy-minded optimist or a struggling sick soul, James says there is a place for your experience. There is a key that fits your lock.
And that your personal experience, your struggle, your pinch of destiny, as he calls it, isn't just some random event. It actually matters in the grand scheme of things.
I think that is a perfect place to leave it. Thank you for listening to Talk Treatises.
See you next time.